Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video I'm back with another casting video revolving around Survivor 50, where again in the past I've tried to make these semi-realistic casts, these casts I could actually see production putting together, even though some of those are a bit outdated, but still, we are at the point now where, through it to all the realistic possibilities, I'm going to be making my dream cast for Survivor 50. Again, casting a grouping of people that I would actually like to see on the show, and right away I'm going to say, this is not a realistic cast in the slightest. I do not even expect the majority of the players on this list to ever be on Survivor ever again, but it'd be cool if they did. And sure, the way that I end up putting this cast together is I did end up initially thinking I was going to go for a second chance theme, as I do feel like we're at the point in Survivor 50, that obviously, again, it's very easy to do a second chance theme. There's so many good possibilities out there that I actually think narrowing it down to a second chance theme, again, no winners, no multiple players, again, is the probably ideal situation. But there is technically a multi-time player that I did really want to see back. So again, I didn't fully go through with that, but I came relatively close. So again, this would be a cast with no winners and almost entirely people that have only played one time, with again an exception we'll talk about. Also, this is also a very older school leaning cast. I mean, this is a cast that doesn't have many new era names, where again in a spot where again I do fully expect Survivor 50 to be primarily a new era cast. Again, there's not as many new era people on this cast, or again adding to the aspect of this being a fairly unrealistic grouping of people. So with that, again, let's start off. I'll be talking about every newbie cast of the show, talking about people from those casts again I would consider, and people that I did end up putting on my dream cast. So with that, let's start off with Survivor Borneo, where I did put one person from Survivor Borneo on my cast. Now beyond that, I mean, the considerations, I did kind of consider Richard Hatch initially before I narrowed down the winner's theme, though I think I'm kind of out on wanting Richard Hatch back. Yeah, I know at the time of Survivor 40 I was kind of incensed at the fact that he wasn't brought back. I think at the point that I'm at now, I'm like, I think I'm fine. Again, I don't need to see him back, especially if we're not going for an all winners sort of theme. I think having no Hatch there is probably for the better. Also, I did consider someone like a Jenna Lewis, who again is a multi-time player, but again I think is someone that I think probably has legs in the new era. I mean, it's someone that still follows the show and would have been a contender for me. Did not pick her. Also, I did consider Gretchen. Just again, I think it would be really cool to have a season 1 person to be a representative on Survivor 50, and again, she was the closest one to being picked that didn't get picked, but the person I did ultimately pick from season 1 ends up being Greg Buis. And again, I think there's multiple reasons. Obviously, Greg at the time was this insane character, very wacky presence, but also someone that is clearly a very intelligent guy. And I think is someone that if he were to come back to modern Survivor and again have this drive to actually play the game, I think there is some intrigue to be had there, especially considering again he's from the first ever season and again would be able to represent season 1 on Survivor 50. I think that's a really cool aspect of this as well, to where I just think Greg is someone that I would love to see back. I think it'd be a really cool way to embrace the history of the show and also be a player that again has some potential on the return. So again, I went with Greg. Next up from Australian Outback, and I didn't really consider anybody. I mean, again, if I was going to include multi-time players, Jerry would have been someone that would have been in the running, though even then I think she would have been cut either way. Next up for Survivor Africa, and here I did have a few genuine considerations. Again, from a returning player point of view, I did consider Lex. Lex is someone that I think would be really interesting on the return, seeing him play modern Survivor, considering his type of game feels very old school. Yeah, again, I ultimately did not pick him. I also did very much consider Kelly Goldsmith, and I really did want Kelly Goldsmith on this cast, though I did feel like it was just a bit tough to squeeze her on by the very end. And also I did consider Clarence, where I know Clarence is someone that has been a very fun personality on RHAP at points, and someone that has watched the show afterwards, and I think maybe could bring some fun energy to it, but again, I did not ultimately pick him. The person I did pick from season 3, though, unshockingly, is T-Bird. Again, T-Bird's just someone that I think should have another chance. She's someone that came so close to coming back in second chance, has since then become such a prominent fixture in the Survivor community, and does these interviews with all the former alumni, and again, is someone that again, I would just love to see her get her chance to play again. In a spot where again, she is such a talented player first time around, and someone that again is still following the show, still knows the ins and outs of the game. Again, I think it would be a really fun returnee, so again, I went with her here. Next up for Survivor Marquesas, and I did put one person from Survivor Marquesas on my actual cast. Now, people I considered, again, like if we were going winners, I would have considered Sepia, though, and I'll be honest, I never found Sepia the most riveting TV character to where I don't know if she would have made my dream cast. But also I would have considered someone like Nalia, who also was not the most riveting character, but I think she's obviously developed a lot since her time on Marquesas. Again, she was 21 at the time. She's in her 40s now. Along with the fact that she was, again, at least at the time of Second Chance, was still a massive Survivor fan. So again, I think there would be some intrigue there, but I did not pick her. Also, I did consider John Carroll, who is someone that I also would have very much liked to see back. I ultimately did not pick him. The person I did pick, though, should also not be that big of a surprise here. I did pick Sean Rector. And again, I've always been a big Sean Rector fan. I think he's an incredible character first time around. Also someone that had some game savviness to him. Again, I think maybe he would be a bit outclassed in the modern day as someone that, again, it's just a travesty that Sean Rector's not been brought back. And again, I think in a dream scenario, Sean Rector would be just such an obvious pick for this spot. So again, I went with him. Next up for Survivor Thailand. And I didn't really consider anyone from Thailand. Again, the only person I even contemplated was Xian, who has obviously already been back. So no one else from Thailand, someone that I'm particularly clamoring to see back. And even Xian, someone I'm not dying to see back either. So again, no one made the cut. Next up from the Amazon. And we do have one returnee from the Amazon. Now again, I did consider Jenna before I narrowed it down the winners, where I think, again, she's obviously had a lot of life experience since then, but again, someone that, again, I think there's just other people I would rather see play again. Heidi is someone I also considered in a similar light, though, again, she ultimately did not make the cut, and I did very much consider Dina. Dina is someone that, again, showed a lot of potential back in the day, but I did feel like, again, there was only really one slot for this old school, older woman at this point, again, between T-Bird and Dina, and I did give it to T-Bird by the end. But the person I did put on, again, the person I broke the rules for, I put on Rob Cesternino. And again, I just think it'd be so much fun to see Rob Cesternino on Modern Survivor. Again, after having watched him on RGP for over a decade at this point, I think seeing Rob be able to play Survivor again over 20 years later would just be pure insanity. And I think it'd just be a fun ride. Who knows if it'll go well? I very much have question marks on that. But again, I would just love to see Rob Cesternino on my TV screens once again. So again, I went with him here. Next up for Survivor Pearl Islands, where no one ultimately ended up making the cut, though, again, I did have some major considerations. Where again, I had another spot where I debated breaking the rules for Johnny Fairplay, where Fairplay's second chance wasn't really much of a second chance, but again, I very much debated putting Fairplay on, and there was a point where he was on the list, yet the more I thought about it, and the fact that we saw him on House of Villains, and there he just came off as just such a caricature of what he originally, it just kind of lessened my overall appeal of needing to see him back right away, where I feel like I would rather see back somebody that we haven't seen on TV more recently, to where while I would very much still like to see Fairplay on, I did feel like us seeing him relatively recently, and it wasn't the most flattering look, was again enough to not put him on my Dreamcast by the end. Also, I did consider Burton, not because Burton's that riveting of a TV presence, but more so because he is someone that I think has a lot of game ability, and I think if he were to play Modern Survivor, I think it'd be really interesting to see how he adapts to the game, but did not pick him. I also considered Krista, who is someone that I thought was a pretty fun character back in the day, and again, I know she's really clamoring to play again now, though again, I considered her, did not pick her. And also, I did consider Rupert. Again, I know it would have broken the rules, and again, we've seen Rupert a billion times, but again, I've always loved Rupert. I wouldn't be opposed to see him back if he was obviously in perfect health, though obviously it's not very likely, but again, this is a Dreamcast, so I still considered him, but he did not make it on. Next up for Vanuatu, and no one from Vanuatu ended up ultimately making the cut, but again, there were definitely some considerations. I did consider obviously Chris. Chris is someone that I think would be really interesting to see back, having played again a very interesting game the first time around, though again, I did decide to stick to no winners in particular, which ended up ultimately leaving him off the cut, even though, to be fair, I don't know if he would have made the cut even if I didn't include that ruling. Also, I did consider Twyla, who is someone that I also would very much like to see back. I think it would be really interesting, but again, another person that did not end up making the cut, where again, I did feel like I had to go with T-Bird as someone to make it on instead of her. I did also consider Eliza, to where again, breaking that one person rule, but again, Eliza is someone that I very much would like to see play Survivor again. I do think it would be very interesting, but another person that again, I just felt like it was tough to squeeze her on by the end. Also considered Amy. I mean, Amy is someone that obviously was a massive character at the time. I don't know where she is with Survivor nowadays, but again, I think it might be interesting to see her play again, but I feel like the fact that she did not really have the same gusto when she came back from Micronesia kind of lessened my appeal bringing her back. But with that, we then move on to Survivor Palau, where again, a few considerations. Again, I'll mention Tom Westman, who again, if Tom Westman is in perfect health back where he was back in the day, I think it would be really interesting to see Tom Westman play again to really test out his game ability, because I've gotten lower on that over time. But again, I ultimately did not end up putting him on either way. I also ended up considering Katie, who I thought was an incredible character on Palau, and someone that I would theoretically like to see back. I just think it's again tough to squeeze her on the cast. Also, I did consider Ian, and Ian is somebody that obviously has this really tragic downfall on the season, to where again, I think it would be really interesting to see him have a second chance, and I felt like it was tough to squeeze him onto the cast. Also, I did consider Kobe, who is someone that I grew a lot of respect for on my rewatch of Survivor Palau, and the fact that I do think he'd be an incredible character on the return. I think it's a travesty we haven't seen him back, though also again, it's kind of tough to fit him onto this cast. Next, I'm moving on to Guatemala, and I did consider a couple people. I considered Rafe, who is someone that obviously played a very impressive game at the time. I think it would be interesting to see him play again, though he ultimately didn't make the cut. I did also consider Judd, who was obviously also an incredible character at the time. Though I think my question for Judd is the fact that I don't know what new we're going to see. And again, because in comparison to the next person we'll be talking about that made it onto the cast, I just feel like that person's someone that I think has a little bit more game to them, where I feel like Judd is someone that is very messy, but is mostly, again, a player that is pretty straightforward. So again, I think there's a lot more intrigue from the other player I picked. Also, I did consider Brian, where Brian's someone that obviously gets talked about as this like robbed pre-merger that should come back. And again, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing Brian back. Yeah, again, I just think it was tough to fit him on. But then we move on to Panama, where I did put one person from Survivor Panama on the cast. And people I want to mention here, again, I'll mention Terry Dietz. Terry Dietz is someone that, again, didn't really get a proper second chance, had to leave early. And I've always wanted to see Terry Dietz back. Again, I think field here is very, very difficult, to where, considering there's a lot of people we never saw genuine second chances for. And like Terry at least got like a semblance of his. I just feel like, again, there's other people I'd rather see back over Terry. And again, I'll mention Sari. Again, she didn't really fit within the rules, but again, I could have broken them. But at the end of the day, it's like, again, we've seen a lot of Sari recently. I don't know if I necessarily need to see her on Survivor US again right away. I left her off. Person I did put on, though, ends up being Shane. And this was a big debate for me. Again, for Shane, it was, again, a debate between him and Judd. It was a debate between him and Fairplay also. I did decide to go Shane at the last second here, simply because, again, I think it's a spot where we haven't seen Shane on TV in a while. And even, like, in terms of the Survivor world, in terms of, like, podcasting, I feel like we have not seen Shane in a little bit. Where, again, I think Shane would be a breath of fresh air on Modern Survivor. Obviously, a very different character than what we typically get on Modern Survivor. But also someone that, again, definitely has game to him. Again, he is obviously this, like, very honor-bound player, someone that's not willing to, like, swear on things and then break them. But that also leads to a lot of complexity from him that I think is really interesting to see, to where, again, I do think Shane is someone that is probably one of the most complex people to play Survivor. And again, mixing out the fact that he is also this like really fun character, I decided to bring him back in this spot. Next up for Survivor, Cook Islands. And no one from Cook Islands ended up making the cut. But again, I considered people like Yule. Again, Yule's one of my favorite winners. Wouldn't be opposed to seeing him back, especially after Winners at War. Again, kind of ended in a bit of a whimper for him. But again, at the end of the day, it's just easier to not put him on. I did also consider Penner, who, again, I've also loved Penner as a character. I would also like to see Penner back. Yeah, again, I just think it's tough to fit him on this specific cast. Also, I did consider Nate Gonzalez, who I think has always been this person that I was shocked to see Nate never be really in the running to return following that, as I did think he was a really fun character on Cook Islands. Yeah, again, did not pick him. Now for Survivor Fiji, and I mean, not shockingly, no one from Survivor Fiji made it on, but again, I actually considered a certain person way more than what you would think. Now, I did not put on Earl, as again, Earl's a winner. And to be fair, Earl's probably the most likely returnee from Survivor Fiji at this point. But again, I ultimately did not go with him. And the person I very much considered was Dreams. And again, I was so close to putting Dreams on this cast. Again, he literally was on my initial draft. But the reason I ended up cutting him by the end is simply because I do think there's a lot of question marks for me in terms of how he would adapt to the modern game. Would he really play the modern game that hard? And again, I think when you already have someone like Sean who has those similar issues, I think Sean's just a much more interesting character, to where ultimately I ended up cutting Dreams by the end. So for Survivor China, and no one from China made the cut, though I had some massive considerations. Obviously, I very much consider Todd. Todd is someone that, again, if I was including winners, probably would have made the cut. There again, he definitely is probably the winner that has not been back at this point that I would like to see back the most. Again, I just felt like it felt right to not keep him on this cast, have him as like the only winner. Again, he ended up not making it on. I also considered Amanda, though Amanda's not someone that I'm like personally clamoring for. While I think it would be really interesting to see Amanda return at this point, she's never been the most dynamic personality to me, where again, I just think there's other people I'd rather see back. I also considered PG, who again, I know is still someone that's in the Survivor community, plays a lot of these online games with people, and I still think someone has a lot of potential in Survivor, yet ultimately did not go with her. Next up for Survivor Micronesia, and I did put one person from Survivor Micronesia on the cast. Now, people I considered, really the only one I did consider that did not make it on was Tracy Hughes Wolf, who again, I think would be a really cool returnee. Obviously played a very impressive pre-merge game at the time. Yeah, again, ultimately did not make the cut. Person I put on is Natalie Bolton. Again, I've talked about this for a bit. I would like to see Natalie Bolton play again. Obviously, again, her edit in Micronesia was a bit weird, but I think by the end, she ends up being a really standout character. One that, again, has been in the running so many times in the past. Again, I would like to see her get her proper second chance on the show, where I think there would be a lot of intrigue there, how she's developed her game over time. And so again, Natalie, easy pick from my point of view. Next up, moving on to Gabon. And no one from Gabon ended up making the cut, though I did consider Kenny, who, again, I like Kenny. I think he's someone that would probably be interesting on a return, where again, I could see it going very poorly for him. But again, with him actually having more proper Survivor knowledge, I think there's a world where Kenny's game goes pretty well, though again, ultimately did not go with him. Also consider Crystal, who is obviously this really fun character, though I think my problem with Crystal is I just don't know how much she's going to really acclimate to the new era. I never really got the sense that she was the most like strategically savvy person on the cast. And then mixing that with the fact that I feel like from a POC women side of things, I feel like this is a pretty stacked field. So again, I just did not end up picking Crystal, and I did also end up not picking Ace, who is someone that I've always liked Ace as a pre-merge character. I think it would be really interesting to see Ace back. Yeah, I think that time is probably past to where I ultimately did not put him on. Next up from Survivor Token Sheens, I did obviously have some major consideration, where I did consider Aaron. Aaron is someone that I've always liked. I would like to see back, though again, it's just kind of a tough field to actually fit her on. Also consider Taj, who again is someone that I know doesn't want to play Survivor again, but again, I would have considered her. I think the reason I wouldn't put her on is simply because again, I don't think she would have the gusto and like desire to actually play, to where she really didn't even have that by the end of her game the first time around. So again, I don't know if she'll necessarily have that on the return, so again, did not go with her. Also considered Coach, where again, obviously doesn't fit into the second chance theme, but again, Coach being back would be a lot of fun. Really insane character. Did not put him on. Now moving on to Samoa, where I also did not pick anybody, but again, considerations here. I mean, again, I'll mention Russell Hantz. Now again, I ultimately feel like I'm good in terms of the amount of content we've gotten from Russell Hantz at this point. I just don't feel like it's necessary to see him play again, considering we've seen him play Australian Survivor already. And I just don't know what new we're going to get from Russell at this point, but again, I at least would have considered putting him on the cast. Also, I did consider Jason, who is somebody that I've always personally liked. I always found to be a player that had a lot of potential, though never really was able to show for it. But again, on a cast like this, I just feel like it's very difficult to slot him into this cast. Also, I would consider Shambo, where again, I thought Shambo was obviously an incredible character at the time, though she's another one of these that I just don't know if she'll have the gusto to really play again. It seems to be pretty negative on the experience as a whole, where again, I did not end up picking her. Also, I did consider Dave Ball, where again, I've always found Dave Ball to be a really humorous character. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing Dave Ball play again, though again, just another spot where again, it's just been a bit too long, and I just don't know if there's enough spots on this list. Now moving on to Nicaragua, where I actually put one person from Nicaragua on this cast. Now, people I considered. I did consider Holly, who again is this kind of person that has been kind of forgotten about over time, though I think she had a really interesting run in Nicaragua, but again, tough to fit her on. Also considered Brenda, who again doesn't fit the second chance theme, but again, if we got the Brenda that we got in Survivor Nicaragua, I do feel like Brenda is someone that I wouldn't mind seeing back, though again, obviously there's a chance that we get Caramoan version of Brenda, who didn't really want to be there, and again, ultimately did not pick her. And also I did end up considering Marty, who again was obviously like in my short list by the end. I was very close to putting Marty on, as again, I've always liked to see Marty back. Really, again, it was one of these spots that I was fighting between Marty and Shane, and there's another person we'll be talking about, but at the end of the day, I do feel like the energy that Marty ends up bringing is again something that can be replicated by other players, more so than that of Shane. So again, I ended up not picking Marty for this cast, but the person I did end up going with is Nayanka. And again, fully playing into this not being a realistic cast at all, but again, I actually would not mind seeing Nayanka play Survivor again. Again, she's in a spot now where, yeah, she quit at the time, but she, again, regrets that now, wants to play again, seemingly has this drive to want to genuinely play the game, and is in a spot where, again, I would like to see Nayanka play again. I think it would be really interesting. It'll never happen. Again, they'll never allow it. Again, production would never even consider the thought of letting Nayanka play again, but considering how incredible character she was at the time, and even then was a person playing the game pretty hard, and again, if she really adapts to the modern game, I think Nayanka could be a very interesting player in the new era, but I don't expect it. But who cares, because this is a Dreamcast, so I'm putting her on. And really from this point on, we actually do have a decent stretch of seasons where I did not put anybody on the cast from, and there's literally not another person until Survivor Go Wrong. But again, we'll still run through some considerations along the way. Again, we got Redemption Island, where the only true consideration here was Stephanie Valencia, because again, I've always been a Stephanie Valencia fan, but again, I think the time's probably passed. I think there's probably other better options, so she ultimately didn't make my cut. From Survivor South Pacific, I did end up considering, again, Sophie, who again can't qualify because she's a winner, but again, if there is a winner on the board I would like to see back, I feel like Sophie's definitely up there, especially of those that have played again already. But again, I ultimately did not pick her. I also did consider Jim Rice, who has always been a player that I would have loved to see back. I was very disappointed when he did not get voted back in at the time of Second Chance, though again, sadly, I think that time has probably passed for him as well. And he's again another person that's like fighting with like Marty and a certain other person we'll be talking about later for a final slot on the cast, and I just did not feel like he fit by the end. Now, straight up, not a single person from Survivor 1 World even made my short list, where, again, I guess you could say I like kind of considered Sabrina, but I don't think she was ever really that close to making it on. Same thing goes with like a Jonas, who is someone that I've always liked, but again, I don't think he was really that close to being consideration here. Next up for Survivor Philippines, and again, I would have very much considered Malcolm. No, again, I just feel like we've seen a decent amount of Malcolm. Yeah, I would like to see him again, but I don't know if this is the cast to do it in. I think if I were wanting to see him back, it would be for a season outside of 50, which again, I think is much more primed to have a more, again, high caliber second chance style cast, where Malcolm feels like more in line with something for like, again, a bigger, grander returnee season. So again, left Malcolm off. Abby Maria would also be really interesting to see back. Obviously, incredible character at the time, though another one that, again, probably doesn't fit. And again, also would have been really funny to see her back with RC, who, again, I don't necessarily like need to see RC back, but again, if I were to do a dream cast, it would be RC and Abby back together. But again, ultimately, neither of them end up making the cut. Next up for Kara Moen, and I'm really the only person I truly considered here was Reynold, where, again, I would like to see Reynold back. I think he's someone that has, again, picked up on the game since then, really wants to play again, would be interesting, but again, I just think it's tough to fit him on the cast by the end. Next up for Survivor Blood versus Water, where here I did consider Sierra once again, where, again, I think Sierra Easton's an interesting player, is always going to play hard, but again, I didn't really feel like she fit this cast, so did not pick her. Also considered Hayden, where, again, Hayden had a really interesting run. It's always, to me, really shocking the fact that he hasn't been brought back since. Again, another one, just tough to fit him on. And also, I did consider Brad Culpepper, where I'm not opposed to a Brad Culpepper return. I feel like he obviously had a pretty tragic downfall in Game Changers, and in general is a pretty interesting character and player, to where, again, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing him back, but ultimately did not make the cut. Next up for Kagyan, and also no one from Kagyan made the cut, though I actually did not properly consider Tony, where, again, I feel like Tony's in a spot where I have no interest in really seeing Tony back on Survivor US in the near future. Again, maybe for some big legend season down the road, but for now, I'm good. Also considered Cass, and again, Cass is one of these that maybe I would have put more thought into her if I was like going all in on a more general all-star season, though once it was down to second chance, I just feel like, again, I did not feel like going on my way to put Cass on in the way that I did for like Rob Nino, so again, Cass did not make it on. Also considered a couple early boots in the likes of Jatia, who obviously was an incredible character during her initial run. She has since then been pretty prominent in online community, was pretty prominent diversity mandate going through, to where, again, I would like to see Jatia play again. I just don't think she fits onto the cast. And also, I did very much consider Bryce, where Bryce is someone that obviously has been very involved in the Survivor community. I think it'd be a lot of fun to see Bryce on the show again, though at the same time, I feel like I've seen Bryce play a lot of online games at this point, and I kind of have a good sense of how Bryce would play. And I'll be honest, I don't know if it's the most riveting modern Survivor, where I don't think he played the game in a very dynamic way, but again, I think he would be a fun character, but again, I did not end up picking him for the cast. Next up for Stanwell Del Sur, where no one made it on, but again, Ozzy would have considered Natalie Anderson. Again, wouldn't be opposed to seeing her back, but again, just felt like this was not the cast for her. More genuine consideration was Reed, who is someone that I think, again, always is a bit of a travesty that we never got to see replay again, where he had so much potential his first time around. And also has a very notable speech during his tribal, though at the same time, again, I just think it's tough to fit him on. And again, with that, again, also something like Jeremy fits in line with the Natalie Andersons of, again, someone I wouldn't be opposed to seeing play Survivor again, considering I do really like Jeremy, but just, again, did not feel like he fit this cast. And a similar thing goes with Wentworth as well, where, again, Wentworth, another person, I would like to see her back at some point down the road, but I just don't know if this is necessarily the spot for her. Now moving on to Worlds Apart, where I did very much consider Mike Holloway, where, again, no winners by the end, but Mike is someone that I very much would like to see play again. I think there was a lot of untapped potential there in him as a player, where, again, I think he demonstrated a lot of great skills despite the fact that he had to win out by the end, but ultimately did not end up going with him. And also I consider Carolyn Rivera, though, again, I just feel like Carolyn's someone that, again, tough to fit on. I think there's so many other considerations that she ultimately did not make the cut. Next up for Survivor Co-Wrong. And finally, we're at a point where I finally put another person on the cast here. Now, people I did consider Ty, where I think Ty is actually in this interesting spot where he obviously played back-to-back. It's obviously been a while since we've seen him last, and I do feel like he's someone that actually would perfectly fit into the new era, to where, again, I very much consider Ty, though did not end up going with him. I also consider Julia, who I think is this person who had a lot of potential, and again, she's now older, really wants to play again, though ultimately she did not make it on. And also I did very much consider Nick Majorano, who I thought was a really fun presence at the time. I thought he had some really cool insight in doing podcasts on RJP, to where, again, I think Nick is actually someone that could be interesting on the return, but I ultimately did not pick him. Person I did pick, unsurprisingly, is Sydney. Again, I think Sydney's someone that, again, I've always liked. I thought was a really good character. Also a really interesting player, one that played a pretty fluid game. And while I think there are definitely missteps in her end game for sure, I do think she's someone that, again, has a lot of potential as a player and would, again, very much like to see her back, so she made the cut. Next up for Millennium X, and I'm kind of surprised no one made the cut here, as I did have a few considerations. I mean, yeah, if I was including winners, I think Adam Klein probably would have made the cut. I think Adam Klein's actually like a really interesting character on Winners at War, where seeing him play again would have been cool, but ultimately did not pick him. Hannah Shapiro is also someone that I really like, and while again, I know she's very anti-wanting to play again, I would have considered her for this list, but she did not make it on. I also very much consider Jay, and Jay is someone that I'm kind of surprised we never got to see him play Survivor again. Well, obviously we've seen him on the challenge. And I think Survivor's a spot where, again, you would have assumed he would have been asked back, but considering his prominence on the challenge, I just felt like, again, there's other people I would rather see back more. And a similar thing goes with Michaela, where, again, Michaela is someone that I think has, again, developed over time. I think she's someone that could be a very deadly player on Survivor in the modern day, though at the same time, again, we've seen her on the challenge. I feel like I'd rather just stick with her on the challenge. Next, I'm moving on to HHH, where nobody ended up making the cut, though I had some deep considerations. Obviously, I considered Chrissy. Chrissy's someone that obviously has a really interesting downfall in the game, someone that, again, was a very strategic player, very good physically, maybe not the greatest socially, but again, had a lot of skills for the game. I think it'd be really interesting to see her return, but sadly, she did not end up making the cut for me. Also considered Devin Pinto, who is someone that I've always liked. I thought he played a very understated game in HHH, where he comes pretty close to potentially winning the game, though ultimately, again, I just think it's tough to really fit him in this cast. And similar thing goes with Joe. I've always liked Joe as a character. I thought he was, again, a very messy player, but played the game in a very interesting way, though ultimately does not make the cuts. And also, I do consider Allie, where Allie is somebody that, again, at the time I was very high on as this like early boot that had potential. That I think at the time that we're at now, again, it's been a while. I think there's just other people that I would bring back over her. So again, she did not come back. But then we're moving on to Ghost Island, where I did put one person from this cast on my season. Now, people I did consider Kellen. I mean, Kellen's someone that is, again, still pretty prominent in the community. I think it would be really interesting to see her play again, though ultimately cannot find room for her. I also did consider Chris Noble, where, again, Chris Noble would be really funny, especially with the person that, again, ends up making the cut. Though I just feel like it's tough to really say Chris Noble alone should return in this spot, so ultimately he did not make the cut. And also I did consider Stephanie Johnson, where I've always liked Stephanie Johnson on her season. Obviously it's very improbable she'll come back based on all the things that happened to her. So again, that's why I considered for the Dreamcast in particular here, ultimately she did not make the cut. But the person I did put on, unsurprisingly, is Dominic. And again, Dominic's someone that, again, I would love to see Dominic play again. I think Dominic is someone that obviously has this great second chance story. Again, someone that came extremely close to winning, the closest anyone has been to winning that has ended up losing the game. And through that, I think there's a lot of intrigue there, but also just naturally, I think Dominic is a very interesting presence on a show, someone that is going to be playing very aggressively, someone that's going to play very calculated. And through that, I think Dom is just such a perfect person to put on a returning season, where, again, ultimately, I did feel like he was a pretty perfect fit here. Next, I'm moving on to Dave vs. Goliath. And I actually put 4 people from Dave vs. Goliath on the cast. Where, again, with most of the casts on this season, I did not put multiple people on for the majority of them. Dave vs. Goliath is one of the few that I did. And again, the fact that I put 4 on is ridiculous, but I think that really just shows the strengths of Dave vs. Goliath's cast. Now, there was a little bit of debate for me if it was worth putting them on the cast, simply because, again, this is a dream cast. I think this is really just more so an exercise to really talk about all these more practical picks I would want to bring back. Where, again, I think all 4 of these people are very practical people that could come back for 50, but screw it. I think that emphasizes even more how much I do want these people back for 50. So with that, again, the people I did end up not putting on the cast I did consider, again, Mike White is someone that, again, I think would be a really interesting returnee. I mean, obviously he's had more success in his career since Survivor with the White Lotus. He ultimately did not go with him. And I also did very much consider Natalie Cole, who, again, who I think would be pretty interesting on return. I think the issue is that I don't necessarily see it going well for her, and I don't really see much change from her. But through that, I just feel like, again, for people that I think have more potential on the return, I just rather go with those people over her. But with that, again, people I put on. First up, we got Angelina. And again, Angelina is someone I am expecting on 50. I think Angelina is someone that fits in line with the type of person that you would expect to be brought back, someone that Jeff openly loved at the time. So again, I did very much debate if I should put Angelina on my cast, just because, again, I think it's pretty clear already that she is coming back. But again, I just think Angelina is just such a perfect casting choice, though, to where it's tough to say no to Angelina. And again, there were definitely some people that, again, we'll talk about down the road that could have taken Angelina's spot. Even like Chrissy, as we just talked about, someone that could have potentially been in the spot over her. But I just think at the end of the day, Angelina is just such an incredible character across Dave vs. Goliath that I'd be remiss to not put her on my cast. Also, I did put on Davey. And Davey's probably the person I'm a little bit more worried about being on 50, in the sense that, again, I feel like he very much screams out as like alternate potential. Again, I'm just showing my love for Davey, putting him on this cast. I would very much like to see him play again. I know he really wants to play again. He's also someone that has always been this alternate for so many previous shows. Where I thought Davey was a really fun character, really aggressive player on Dave vs. Goliath, and someone that I would love to see back. So again, put him on. Also, this is another one that I think this person's a near lock for 50. Again, didn't know how much I need to put them on my cast, but at the end of the day, I really want them on 50, and that person's Christian. And again, I think Christian Christian might be the person I'm the most eagerly anticipating for 50, considering, again, Christian is someone that obviously in his own right is an incredible character, someone that plays the game in a really interesting way, but also in the time since has been, again, such a prominent fixture in the online community, as someone that, I watch him play Blood in the Clock Tower, and I think he always plays Blood in the Clock Tower in a really interesting way, a very methodical way, and again, I think him bringing that approach to Survivor would be really fun. So again, I personally want him on, and also I end up putting on Gabby, where Gabby's another person, again, pretty prominent in the Survivor community, someone that has played a lot of these games, and someone that, I'll be honest, I don't know if I want her back because she would be good at the game. As again, I like Gabby, but again, watching her play some of these games like The Traders or Goose Goose Duck or Blood in the Clock Tower, again, Gabby has some pretty bad reads at points, and I think it could lead her astray, as we even see on David vs. Goliath. But I do feel like Gabby is still the type of player that I would love to see back. I think someone that has, again, potential for sure still, even within that. And again, I think would have a very interesting dynamic with Christian in particular on the return. But ultimately, I mean, Gabby's probably the person I was the most willing to cut of these David vs. Goliath people, but I just felt like by the end, I did still want to keep her on. Next, moving on to Edge of Extinction. I put one person on the cast, and it's not the person you might think it would be, where, again, obviously, considerations here. I did consider Chris, where I actually would not be opposed to a Chris Underwood return. I think it'd actually be really interesting to see him play the game again, now having returned after, again, having, again, one of the most wonky Survivor wins of all time, along with the fact that he also has a challenge win, where, again, I think it'd be really interesting to see him play Survivor again, but ultimately did not make the cut. I also did not put on Rick Devens, and again, Rick Devens is probably the biggest lock on this cast to return, yet also, and I don't personally need to see Rick Devens back. I think I'm good. I think I have a good sense of how he would play. And he'd probably be fun on the show. But unlike the likes of Christian or Angelina, who are also, again, pretty good spot to return, I feel like those people are people I'm personally more invested in than Rick Devens. So again, did not put Rick Devens on. Also considered Ron, who is someone that I've always liked. I would have always liked to see a Ron return. I was so close to putting him on my dream cast, yet he ultimately did not make it on. Also, I considered War Dog, also another person that I think was a really interesting player at the time. Someone that I think could be very interesting on a return, yet did not make it on. Though the person I did put on the cast here ends up being Victoria. And again, I've always liked Victoria. I think Victoria plays a really interesting game. It's kind of behind the scenes, also playing very aggressively at the same time, also being someone that can be very cutting in confessionals. Also someone that I think just has so much potential on a return. Again, I very much like Victoria. I would like to see her play again. For a while, sadly, I don't necessarily see it for her in terms of practicality. Again, for my dream cast, I did end up putting her on it. Next up for IOI, and I actually put a person from IOI on this cast, also probably not the person you're expecting. Now, the people I considered, and being Nora, who is an insane character, someone that I think would be really funny to see back, yet ultimately, again, I just did not feel like gelled with this cast. Also, I consider Lauren Ashley Beck, who again was obviously one of the best players on the season, would be interesting to see her return, yet ultimately did not go with her. Also considered Jamal, who is someone that, again, I love listening to Jamal on podcasts. I think he has a lot of great insights on the game, yet ultimately he did not make it on. And also, I did end up considering Kelly Kim, who obviously would have a very interesting arc on a return, and was also a very dynamic player in her own right, yet I did not go with her. The person I did go with, though, is Karishma. And again, this is one there, again, at the time of 39, I don't know if I necessarily would have been in this ballpark of like wanting Karishma to return. Yeah, I think as time goes on and seeing Karishma again still be involved in the Survivor community at point, again, having her play the sequester game and actually playing extremely well on that, and I think Karishma on a returning season could be very deadly, where I think people are just not going to really think much of Karishma, and through that I think can be a very dynamic player, someone that again I would have a pretty decent amount of faith in, especially from a more strategic point of view on the return, where again, Karishma is someone that I would very much like to see back, and again, decided to put her on the cast. Next up for Survivor 41, where I did put two people on the cast from Survivor 41, where again, one of the few casts I put multiple people from. Though again, as I mentioned before, this is a very New Era light cast. I only have 5 people from the New Era, which again, is definitely not what's going to actually happen, but again, screw it, it's my dream cast. Though again, from 41 people I did consider that didn't make it on, I did consider Erica, where again, I would actually not be opposed to an Erica return. I think Erica is probably a much better player than what we actually got shown on the show, to where I would love to see her live out that potential, though ultimately I did not pick her. Evie is someone that I considered, as again, Evie is someone that is still very prominent in online community, also obviously has an interesting returning storyline if they were to come back, though ultimately again did not go with them either. Also, I consider JD, who I think is like as an early boot, someone that again I think could demonstrate a lot of development if he comes back, where he was so young the first time around, and to very still relatively young, but still again maybe would have better chances on the return, but did not go with him. also I consider Brad just because I think it would be funny. I think Brad is probably one of the best pre-merge characters in the history of the show, and to see him get another shot would be humorous, but again, did not end up picking him. The people I did end up picking here. First up, we got Ricard. And Ricard's someone that, again, I do very much worry about his actual 50 chances. I do think it's actually pretty unlikely he comes back, but I think Ricard's actually a really interesting player. Now, straight up, Ricard would not be the pick here had not been for a certain other person. Where, again, I think straight up, there's probably a few people that we'll be talking about that didn't make this cast that will feel a bit egregious that they didn't make my cast over Ricard, as, again, I think I probably actually genuinely would like to see those later people back more so than Ricard. But, again, I think Ricard's dynamic with the other person, that makes Ricard someone that I would want back even more. And also, again, those people are going to be on 50 anyway. So, again, I'll give a little shout out here to Ricard as someone that I would like to see back. But also the other person putting on the cast is Shan. And again, Shan's someone that I don't know where she stands with Survivor 50. Maybe she's on, maybe she isn't. But she's someone that should be on Survivor 50. Again, she really was the star of Survivor 41 and being such an incredible villain on that season, and considering her really complex dynamic with Ricard. Again, I think that would be really interesting to see on a return. I think to see those two together, again, would be really interesting here. Again, I think Shan is someone that's going to be playing the game very hard and potentially bring a lot of drama to the show. So, again, Shan's someone that I easily picked for this cast. Next up for Survivor 42, where I did put one person from Survivor 42 on the cast. Now, people I considered I did not put on. Obviously, Marianne is someone that, again, if this was including winners, she would be very much a consideration. I'll be honest, even then, I don't know if she necessarily makes my dream cast, where I feel like there's probably other winners I would like to see back over Marianne. But Marianne's someone that, I would like to see her being tested in a spot where she does probably have a bigger target on her back, which I think would be interesting to see play out, but I ultimately did not go with her. I consider Mike Turner. I've always liked Mike Turner. I think he's a really interesting character, someone that obviously played a really interesting game, and I think would have a pretty interesting returning storyline. Ultimately did not go with him. Lindsay is someone that I also think is a pretty understated presence on that season. Someone that I thought was actually like a pretty decent podcast guest on RHP. She kind of surprised me in the fact that she was a much more interesting personality there than I expected. Where, again, she's someone I would like to see back theoretically, but ultimately, again, not on this cast. Also, I considered Zach, where, again, I think Zach would just be a really humorous return. Again, Zach is someone that has become a major presence within the Survivor online community, and someone that I think would have potential on the return, especially with him being pretty well connected in the alumni community. That ultimately did not go with him. But the person I did put on the cast here ends up being Omer. Really, Omer might be one of the top picks for me, where Omer is just such a fun presence in the online community, where, well, again, looking at like how his run on 42 went, he's someone that, again, I would very much like to see back, but I don't think it would necessarily be the spot where like he has to be on my Dreamcast. The reason why he has to be on my Dreamcast is because just how fun he is on podcast appearances, how fun he is when playing games like Goose Goose Duck and Blood in the Clock Tower, where he brings this very chaotic energy to where, again, straight up, I don't know if he necessarily brings that to Survivor. I think he'll probably play it a bit more straight there, but I still think he's someone that is very primed to bring a lot of chaos to whatever show he's on, and someone that, again, I would love to see back, so I went with him. Next up for 43, and no one from 43 made the cut, even though, again, I had some considerations. And again, I considered Cassidy someone that I wouldn't be opposed to seeing back. I think definitely has an interesting returning storyline, someone that could bring some drama to the show. Ultimately, I did not go with her. Also considered Owen. Again, I like Owen. I don't know how much confidence I necessarily have in Owen's game ability in the grand scheme of things, but again, I think Owen is a largely affable presence, but someone that, again, I just did not fit onto the cast. I also did not fit on Jesse. And again, Jesse's one of these people I'm mentioning where, again, I would rather see Jesse back than Ricard, probably. To be fair, I think they're probably on the same level, but again, I think Jesse's someone that, again, him not being on this cast does feel a little bit egregious, considering I think there's a lot of intrigue from a Jesse return. Yeah, ultimately he did not make it on. Also considered Carla, someone that I also would not be opposed to seeing back. Probably has a lot of potential on return. He ultimately did not pick her. Also, that put on Cody, someone that also I think would be really interesting to see back alongside Jesse. I think that dynamic together would be really interesting, but when Jesse didn't make it on, Cody didn't either. Also considered Dwight, which might seem random to most people, but I actually would really like to see Dwight back. I was actually really debated if I should put Dwight on my Dreamcast, simply because, again, Dwight is someone that I have watched his live streams, him streaming Blood in the Clock Tower, and him playing Goose Goose Duck, and Dwight is just such a fun, chaotic presence on the season as well. But again, I just think at the end of the day, like, he is fighting for the same slot that Omer is, and obviously Omer's just a more bigger profile player, to where, again, I went with Omer over Dwight, and obviously, again, I could have theoretically had both, but I do think, considering how lower profile Dwight is as a player, even on his respective season, I did feel like it was a bit tough to really justify putting him on the cast by the end. And also, I did consider Ellie, where Ellie is someone that, again, I thought had a really interesting downfall in the game, someone that, again, I think has a lot of potential on a return, though ultimately did not end up going with her. Now from Survivor 44, where also nobody from Survivor 44 made the cut. Now, the biggest consideration here was actually the winner in Jam Jam, where I would like to see Jam Jam back. I think Jam Jam is a really fun personality, though I do think, again, having no winners just makes sense for this cast, where, and if I did include winners, he probably makes it on, but even then it's not necessarily a guarantee, but again, he's someone that definitely was top of mind for me. I did not put him on. Also, did not put on Carolyn, who, again, I like Carolyn as a character. I think she's a really iconic presence for the new era, but ultimately, I just felt like she's not really one that feels very personal to me. Like, I feel like I'll be fine without Carolyn on 50, which is probably what's going to happen, but again, it's a spot where, again, I don't know if Carolyn's necessarily changing her game. I think she just plays the game probably the same, which, again, she'll still provide good character moments, but I think there's just other people that probably have more potential to display. Also, I did consider Franny, who is someone that, again, is a prominent fixture in the online community, has been very fun on podcasts and again in all these different games that people play, but ultimately again just could not find a spot for her on the cast, where again I think it was between her and Gabby, and I do think I would rather see Gabby back over her. Also end up considering Josh, where again I think Josh is someone that has no real chance of ever coming back, but I thought he was a really fun presence on the season, really fun dodo content towards the end of his run, where again I wouldn't be opposed to seeing him back, but again I think it's tough to fit him on, along with also Matthew. And again I very much contemplated Matthew just because Matthew obviously has this like untapped potential, but again for me it was like Matthew or Omer. I think they were kind of fighting for the same spot, and again maybe even like Davey also, but I just felt like they were people that I wanted to see back more than Matthew, even though Matthew is still someone that again I would theoretically like to see back as well. And also I did consider Maddie, where Maddie again for a first boot I thought brought a lot of fun chaotic energy to that season, and spot where again I would love to see her do that again. And while again will it play out well for her on any appearance, who knows, but again I do think she would at least be fun while she's there, but ultimately did not end up going with her. Next, number 45. And here, despite this being probably my favorite new era cast, I do actually only have one person from this cast coming back in this spot. But again, people I considered. I get to consider D, but again, I did not put winners on. And to be fair, D's not like someone I'm like dying to see back again. I think there's probably other people I would want to see back over D anyway, so D did not make it on. Also, I considered Austin, just because I think Austin would have a really interesting second chance storyline. And also, I think actually like the dynamic of like him dating Jeff Probst's niece would actually be kind of funny to see on the show itself, but not put him on. Also did not put on Jake, who again, I also really would like to see play again, where again, I think he's someone that could have a lot of potential on a return. Yeah, again, just tough to fit him on. Also considered Katura, where again, I also really like Katura. And to be fair, Katura was definitely in consideration. I mean, for me, it was like really debate between Katura and like Karishma and potentially like, again, maybe Angelina, if I decided Angelina was someone that like didn't necessarily need to be on my cast. But again, at the end of the day, I did feel like those other people edged out Katura here, but again I also do like Katura. I think she would be a really interesting returnee, so again considered her here. Now I also considered Emily, where Emily's someone that again I think probably has a lot of potential on a return. I think is someone that would also potentially have a good story on a return, though I think Emily is kind of similar to Carolyn in the light that again I don't think there's really much like personally attaching me to Emily. Like I don't feel like I personally have a reason to actually have Emily on my personal dream cast. Also I think consider Caleb, who is also a really interesting presence on his season, again played the game in an underdog position but also played very hard, and again definitely would like to see him back for 50, but again I didn't feel like I need to put him on my dream cast, so did not put him on. Also I very much consider J Maya, because you might not know this, but I'm a bit of a J Maya stan, where J Maya is someone that, again, obviously her run in the season itself is, again, a little bit lacking, but again, I like J Maya's music, so I consider her, but again, did not end up putting her on. And also, I did very much consider Zabaya. I think Zabaya is like one of these people that, again, as an early boot, I think probably has one of the best chances of being brought back. And I think there's a lot of merit for that. I think she's someone that plays the game very hard. Would be an interesting returnee, but ultimately did not pick her. The person I did pick from Survivor 45 ends up being Drew. And Drew is someone that I've really grown on over time. Well, I did, again, respect him as a pretty fun presence on the actual season itself. I think the more time gets away from it, the higher I get on Drew as a really fun returnee. Mainly because, again, like I think listening to his podcast appearances with RJP, he has, again, a lot of really interesting insight on the game, and a lot of insight that feels very opposed to what the new era is about, where I think that alone would make him a really interesting person to bring back. But also, I thought he was a really fun villainous character on the show. Again, having rewatched 45 since then, I really grew to appreciate how fun of a villain Drew is, where I think mixing these things, again, Drew is someone that I very much would like to see back, so he made my cut. Next up for Survivor 46, and only one person made the cut, and straight, this is actually the last person that even made the cut on this list. But again, there were a lot of considerations. I did consider Charlie, obviously someone that I'm expecting to be on 50, and I wouldn't be opposed to her. I do think he has a very interesting storyline, especially if Maria is there, which I did kind of consider Maria, but again, Charlie's really the main one here I really considered as, I think he's the one of the more interesting individual storyline. Yeah, at the end of the day, I've never been the biggest Charlie fan, as again, he just comes off very game body to me outside of his love of Taylor Swift, so again, did not ultimately pick him. Also, was so close to putting Liz on my cast, where that was a last second decision. I had Liz on my initial draft of the list, and again, I would like to see Liz back. I think it'd be really great, obviously, after her meltdown, and her, again, like talking in post-show about how she had all these different strategies that no one got to see, and she lied about being a millionaire, was going to reveal that final tribal again. I think someone that has those crazy of schemes is someone that would be really interesting to see brought back. Yeah, ultimately, again, I did feel like it was tough to fit her on by the end. Also, probably the most insane person that I end up having to cut by the end, I did cut Q. And again, I would love to see Q back. I very much want him on 50, but it's also a spot here where, again, he's going to be on 50 anyway. Do I really need to put him on my personal cast? When, again, the likes of a Sean Rector, a Davey, a Ricard, an Omer, even a Drew. Again, these are people that I don't look at as big of locks as Q, to where, again, I don't think I need to be the person to tell you that Q should be on Survivor 50, because I think it's very obvious he should be on Survivor 50. Where, and theoretically, again, yes, he should be on this cast. And again, I would rather have Q on the cast than Ricard in particular, but it should be pretty apparent. So again, I decided to just leave him off the cast because, again, it's obvious he's going to be on anyway. The person from 46 I did end up putting on here, again, the final person for the cast as a whole, ends up being Venus. And Venus is someone that I don't think will be on Survivor 50, despite a lot of people online very much thinking that's the case for some reason. I never got the sense they liked Venus. I would be personally surprised if she is on, again, but I do hope that she's on. Again, I think she is a very fun personality, someone that is willing to bring a lot of drama, a lot of sassiness, someone that's also going to be playing the game very hard and probably messily, but again, still playing very hard. And I think those are things that you would want from a player in a new era. And again, I think Venus is someone that, again, just perfectly fits in line with who I would want when I return each season. For a while, I don't necessarily expect her to come back. Again, I felt like she was the perfect pick for this stream cast. But with that, again, we still got one more season to talk about, and that's Survivor 47. And again, no one from Survivor 47 made my cut. Now, again, not saying that I don't want people from 47 on 50, as obviously, again, I expect there to be people, and I think there are some good contenders. Now, I would personally like to see Rachel back, simply for the fact that of being able to truly test her game ability, see how she does on a return. And that would be the main reason I considered her, but then not put her on. I also considered Sam, who I actually thought was a very affable presence post-show. I thought he came off very self-aware, so very knowledgeable about the game, where I would not be opposed to a Sam return, but just did not feel like he fit the cast. Also, did consider Teeny, where I know a lot of people are not really clamoring for a Teeny return, but I thought Teeny had some pretty interesting moments on the show, again, coming off villainous at some points, while also having these more vulnerable moments. And again, I thought Teeny was an interesting character, but not someone I end up putting on my ultimate cast. Also considered Genevieve, where Genevieve is someone that, again, I would not be shocked that Genevieve is on 50. I think she's a very bombastic player. One that, again, I think would be in line with who I would want for the new era, but I just think, again, there's probably other characters that attach to me a bit more, so ultimately did not pick Genevieve for my cast, even though, again, I think she'll be definitely a consideration to be on. Same thing goes with Andy. Again, I really like Andy. Again, he's obviously a massive super fan, but again, it's kind of like a Q situation where I don't think I need to tell you that Andy needs to be on 50, as again, I expect him to be on anyway. And I think there's other people that I just want to give a bit more of a shout out to. So ultimately, Andy did not make my cuts. Also consider Caroline, and Caroline, someone that also I think would be a really interesting pick for a return. While not the most dynamic personality, I think is someone that plays a very interesting game. And I think if she were to return, she'd be a massive dark horse to win Survivor 50. But ultimately, I just feel like there are other people I cared about a bit more to bring back. Also, I considered Saul, where I really like Saul. I do think Saul definitely demonstrated a lot of ability as a player, just was not able to execute it on that season. Where seeing him back, I think would be really interesting. That ultimately did not go with him. Also, to consider Rome, and I know a lot of people do not like Rome. Yeah, I personally think Rome's a really interesting character, but ultimately, again, like I would obviously rather see Q than Rome. I'd rather see Omer than Rome. I'd rather see like Davey over Rome, or Drew, or Ricard even, where at that point it's like, again, am I really putting Rome on my dream cast? But I do think Rome is someone that, again, I would probably like to see back more than most people. But with that, again, that is everyone I considered for my dream cast of Survivor 50. Now the people I end up picking for my cast by the end up being Greg Buis from Survivor Borneo. We got T-Bird Cooper from Survivor Africa. We got Sean Rector from Survivor Marquesas. We got Rob Cisternino from Survivor the Amazon. We have Shane Powers from Survivor Panama. We have Natalie Bolton from Survivor Micronesia. We have Nyanka Mixon from Survivor Nicaragua. We have Sydney Gillen from Survivor Co-Wrong. We have Dominic Abate from Survivor Ghost Island. From Survivor David vs. Goliath, we have Angelina Keeley, Davey Rickenbacker, Christian Hubicki, and Gabby Patscusi. From Survivor Edge of Extinction, I have Victoria Baymonde, or not Baymonde. I mean, technically I've learned that's actually not Baymonde, even though I think Baymonde is a lot more fun to say. So I think I'll just say Baymonde, even though it's Baymond, but that's not as fun to say. From IOI, I put on Karishma Patel. From Survivor 41, I ended up putting on Ricard Foyer and Shan Smith. From Survivor 42, I put on Omer Sahir. From Survivor 45, I put on Drew Basile. And from Survivor 46, I put on Venus Vafa. So with that, again, that is my dream cast for Survivor. Again, a lot of really random picks on the board here. But with that, again, I would very much like to see be brought back. If not for 50, then at least for some season down the road. Now, again, down the road itself, obviously, again, expect more 50 coverage when we get more news about 50, where, again, when we get a cast, obviously I'll do a cast reaction to that. Obviously, when we get other information about the format or other aspects of the season, I'll probably end up doing videos for that as well, along with obviously the actual coverage of the season itself when it comes out. And beyond that, obviously just expect more of the same style of content from the channel. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.